Well, here we go. Um, a little XCD night recording we're going to do here. All right, well, it is the 1st November of Saturday, 2018. I want to say it's like the 3rd or the 4th. Can't quite remember the date. It is 3:07 a.m. Literally woke up in the middle of the night. Welcome to another episode of XCD. I wanted to get into a little bit of why comedy is a part of my channel. At one point in time, I actually did stand-up comedy. Prepared for it for months, and then took advantage of a situation where I could actually do some stand-up comedy. That situation was pretty funny. If I can find the link, I'm gonna go ahead and post the footage of me doing stand-up comedy. Not great, but it was my very first time. It's where I cut my teeth, and I've always loved comedy. I'm not going to get into this whole observational thing on my whole history of comedy, but I did want to share a couple of things, and I want to specifically share about this event when I had the opportunity to actually do stand-up comedy. So I was living in Albuquerque at the time. I live in Rio Rancho now. And at that time, there was a comedy, some guy that worked out of the Rio Rancho Hotel, and he may still, I don't know, I don't really follow him. And he would organize these comedy nights. And he was bringing in this comedian, and I can't remember the guy's name. He had a disability of some sort. I want to say he was either in a wheelchair or he had like he had the muscular dystrophy, but his claim to fame is that he was married to Cindy from the Brady Bunch, and so he talked about that a lot in his comedy, and he was actually pretty funny, but he was also a little bit raw, and it didn't take long. He was a little raw, he was a little unpolished around the edges, and there was actually a pretty good audience. I want to say there was probably 100 people there, maybe on the high end, 80 on the low end. They started off the night with a couple of, there was a guy that travels with him that did stand-up comedy, and he was pretty funny. And then there was, because the organizer was organizing it, he also brought in a couple of local comics that did a couple of spots, 2 to 3 minutes. And then I had volunteered to do my open mic night there. Well, everybody that had told me they were going to be there were not there. They were late. And so I said, I'm like, well, can I go on later because none of my people are here and I really want them to hear me. And so he's like, yeah, that's fine. So the main headliner gets up. He does all of his comedy. Like I said, he was a bit rough around the edges. In fact, I think there were people that were staying in the hotel that had seen the announcement that there was going to be comedy in this one little, it's basically a conference area that we were in, one of those long partitioned areas. And so they went in and they were sitting there, and there was a lady there that was getting really offended by his comedy. And so the main headliner, he started like keying in on her and basically heckling her, and it got to the point where he said, well, why don't you just leave? And so he waited until she got up and left. And I mean, it was really uncomfortable. It was really awkward. It's like there's one way of dealing with hecklers, but it was just like, it was a little unpolished. It was a little unprofessional. And, and so everybody was kind of feeling that whole sense of like, wow, what's going on here? This is really kind of crazy. Okay, so the comedy, the guy's stuff goes on for, I don't know, an hour or however long. It wasn't very much to get. It was like $5 or $10. It was pretty cheap. And so at the very end, he goes up, the announcer, the MC guy goes up and he goes like, oh, let's give a big hand for so-and-so. He goes, but don't leave. He goes, because we've got one more comedian. And so he's introducing me. And so I'm going on after the headliner, which you don't do. You don't do. And even the headliner's like, he goes, who the hell goes on after the headliner? And he was like really mad. And he was like giving me crap even before I get up there. So now I've got all my people there. And I go up there and I'm like, so I do my very rehearsed 3 minutes of comedy. I think it was three or five. I can't remember how long it was. And it was okay. It was very forced. It was very, anyway, I'm not going to get into the over analyzing because comedians, pastors, public speakers in general, I think they really, they overly dwell on their craft. And so I get up there and I got good. Everybody was very gracious to me, and they gave me, they laughed at my stuff and they applauded for me. And I remember after the fact, the headliner's friend who had actually opened it up, and he was pretty funny. He's a younger guy. He comes up to me and he goes, that was good. He goes, you did really well in the face of getting blasted by the headliner. He goes, he was pretty brutal with you, man. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. I was like, I didn't know. I had no point of reference for any of this. So anyway, I'm going to start doing some comedy on my channel. I'm going to start throwing it out there, seeing where it lands, because I think it's been 8 years since I've done stand-up comedy. I took a step back from it after my initial one time, and I've really just been over-analyzing it to death. And I've even kind of gotten to the point where I'm like, I'm not going to do stand-up comedy. That's too hard. As a pastor, I try to work in humor into my messages where I can, because it makes for a more engaging sermon when you can pepper it a little bit with comedy. It catches people off guard. It keeps them engaged because they're not expecting you to be funny. With a sermon, there's kind of a balance though. You can't you can't try to make it all about the jokes, because then it becomes less about the message and more about the humor. And so there's some pastors that are so naturally gifted with humor that it just flows, and I've always wanted to be one of those. But what I have found is that a lot of my best humor comes when I actually take the time to prepare it. And comedy is that way. It is a prepared science. There are mechanics involved, there are rudiments involved, there's timing involved. But then at the end of the day, you have to have the content. You have to have the ability to tell a joke. And I had this dream tonight where I think I was going to visit my son, and I had met somebody maybe on the plane or something, and they were like, hey, if you get a chance, I'm going to be performing at this venue. And I'm like, yeah, that'd be great. If I get an opportunity to do that, I'll do that. So then it goes from visiting my son, and now my wife is with me, and we're literally being transported through the air. And now it's like we're over Vegas, or we're over a mall. We're over this big venue with all these people, and all I remember is we're being plopped down at the very front table of this comedy theater, and everybody's applauding, and they're like, okay, and here's our VI, someone that's a very special night. They're being seated in our VIP section. And now if you'll welcome to the stage John Longwell. This is his this has always been his dream to do stand-up comedy. And I'm like, my wife had set this up for me so that I could go and do stand-up. But I'm like overjoyed that she would think of this. But I'm like, I'm shocked, and I've got all this anxiety now because now I'm on the spot and I have nothing prepared. And I'm like, babe, you don't understand how this works. It's not just about the opportunity to do comedy. It's about being prepared to do it, because you don't just go up there and wing it. There are comedians in this day that can do that. In the days past, I remember Rodney Dangerfield. He would go on Johnny Carson, and he had so many jokes that he could just share off the cuff, that he literally could go up there and he could talk for 10 minutes and be side-splittingly funny. I remember they said that Rodney Dangerfield was one of the people that could just make Johnny Carson bust a gut. Another one is Robin Williams. He's because he's always on. He has that kind of nervous energy that always kind of worked to his benefit. And so here I am being thrust upon stage, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And so I remember I was trying to pull up my joke files on my Google Drive so that I had like something to refer to. It was crazy. And so I'm up there, and I'm like trying to tell any and every joke that I can remember off of the top of my head. And so I told the one about the guy who goes to the doctor, and the doctor's examining him down in his private area, and he asks the doctor, he goes, hey doctor, is that normal? He goes, should my left nut be bigger than my other two? Yeah. Okay, so so I'm laughing at my jokes. I'm hoping you're laughing at my jokes too. See, that's the whole thing. And then I go off on this whole like comparison. I'm like, do you realize that stand-up comedy, when Vegas performers, when the tax people were trying to categorize stand-up comedy, and they would go, and a lot of stand-up comedians, they did their work in Vegas, and so they're like, well, what other categories can we put this in? So they ended up putting stand-up comedy into the exact same category as magic and burlesque. And when you think about it, it's actually kind of accurate, because you get up there, you expose yourself, and it better be funny. And it reminded me, exposing yourself, I watch a lot of YouTube, and I don't know how this one, it's like, here's the next search suggestion for you. Well, the next search suggestion for me, and I was on documentaries, and so I think I'm hoping that it was on the documentary list, not anything else, but it was a documentary on men with micro penises. And I'm like, what the hell? Number one, what the hell is a micro penis? And one of them was like, the headline under the documentary title was, man says he's proud of his micro penis. And I'm like, why? Why would you be? And so it's just like, comedy is about, it's like I said, it's mechanics and science and timing and rudiments. It's about the element of surprise. It's about knowing it's basically about how to make people laugh. And physically, if you could hold a person down and tickle them, you could evoke the response of laughter. But because that's illegal, because I'm sure that would be considered assault, you're not allowed to do that. And so comedy has to come at it from the other vantage point, where you have to, one, as the audience, you have to suspend your sense of judgment. You have to kind of open yourself up to have the power of suggestion, to tickle your funny bone. But then there's those comedians that get in there. One of the funniest comedians out there today to me is Daniel Tosh. His material is super dark, it's super hardcore, it's super blue, but his delivery is amazing, because he can touch on some of the most difficult topics to even consider funny. I think he's touched on rape and abortion and you name it, and he will make jokes about it. And he does a successful job of making jokes about it. And obviously, if you're sensitive to that topic, it's not going to be funny, but that's the whole tension of comedy, is everybody has their sacred cow and nobody wants them barbecued. But comedy, real comedy, is about barbecuing every sacred cow and being able to laugh about it. To me, real comedy, the purity of comedy can be seen in difficulties, in the most difficult situations of life, in war, paramedics, firefighters, cops, who sometimes, they'll have their lapel cameras on and people will catch jokes that they make, but a lot of it for them, it's to detract or debug the tension that they're going through, because they're in these high tension jobs. And sometimes comedy is God's relief valve that allows people to escape from the tension and the stress of their situation. And I think for me, I fell in love with comedy as a young kid. I had alcoholic home, family life, lots of fights always going on, and so comedy became an escape for comedians themselves. Comedy is an escape. I've heard a lot of comedians say that comedy is their therapy. They don't pay therapists anymore. They just go on stage and they let it all out there. They become transparent and they just let it all go. And so I know for me, I've struggled with comedy, but I love comedy. I've struggled with it because I look at it from a standpoint of, could I ever do this as a job? And I'm too realistic. I'm too practical. And I'm getting to the point now where I think I want to join I know there's some local comedy groups. I want to join them just to polish my craft, and that could be considered funny. But I want to get better at it, and I want to put myself into a difficult situation where I have to get out there in front of an audience and test my material, because I think and I believe that's the only way I'm going to get better. So with that, I'm going to share with you my absolute favorite joke. It's a clean joke. You can share it with your friends. Okay. So a pirate walks into a bar and he's got a steering wheel attached to his private area. And he goes up to the bartender, and the bartender looks at him and he's like, okay, what's up with the steering wheel attached to your pecker? And the pirate looks at him and he goes, it's driving me nuts. All right, with that is my first engagement into comedy. Slap me a subscribe if you like what you hear. If you want to encourage me to continue to delve into this new realm on my channel of comedy, which is been at the very heart of what I've always wanted to do. And we'll post another video in the future with some more comedy. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, shoot. Yeah, shoot.